All right, folks, it's that time of year. The 2025 Vintage Off-Road Nationals is going to be upon us in the next about month and a half. And so it's about that time to make a video of what I'm going to be bringing this year. Seems like every year the fleet keeps growing. This year's no different. Now, just looking at the count of stuff that's here, it's quite a lot. And by the time I actually get to like packing everything up, I may leave one or two of these behind, but this is what I'm thinking at the moment. And the reason for that has a lot to do with the fact that last year I had problems with my camera. And so I was hoping to get some really nice footage at the time of the RC10T2, the Traxxas TRX3, some other stuff I hadn't really run before, or stuff that was doing really well, like the Laser ZXS Evo, or even the X Factory X5. And I couldn't because I had camera issues, which really sucks. So some of this stuff I plan to bring primarily just to get footage. Obviously I can't race all of these, but I would at least like to get some footage, or at least make up for lost time, let's say, from last year's lack of camera footage. But that being said, let's jump right into it. We'll start with the sort of simpler ones. Let's say first and foremost is the Classic class. I just recently posted a video about this mid-motor Tamiya Madcap. That's the only chassis I'll be bringing for Classic. I do have a DF01 dirt thrasher that's quite good, but I figure I can leave that home. I'm fairly confident that this will do well enough. And at the very least, I want to really focus on making it well enough to compete against the four-wheel drive buggies that other folks will be running in that class. I want to try to see if I can prove a point with this mid-motor buggy. So just that one chassis for Classic. And then for Y2K buggy, that's a new addition to Vonats this year. So very similar to the RC10 Talk rules. I assume they're the same, although I don't know if Eric's going to allow mid-motor Y2K stuff, but we'll put that aside for a minute. I'm going to be bringing my Kyosho RB Type R for the Y2K class. I've run this a few times at RC10 Talk races. The last three, actually, sorry, two out of the last three RC10 Talk races over the last year. And it's been pretty good, and each time I make, a few refinements to the setup. So I think, based on what I learned at those races, and what I remember the Adrenaline RC track to be like, if the surface condition is anything like what it was last year, I think I have a reasonable setup for this car, so it should work well. And of course, it pairs tires quite very easily with the RC10B2, so these can share wheels and tires. Should make it easier to pack wheels and tires. So I'm going to bring that. I do also have my RB5 SP2, which I thought about bringing as a companion in case one fails or whatever. But that's, as you can see, I have enough already, and I want to really focus on this for the Y2K class. I don't think I need to bring the RB5, although that is a fantastic car. I'll run that in the RC10 Talk races in the coming months, so in October, and then I guess next spring, and then maybe I'll bring the RB5 next year for Vonats. Possibly, we'll see. So okay, it's Classic, Y2K. Let's just work our way backwards here. Classic four-wheel drive buggy, so that's the 13.5 class. I got two Yokomos here. This one right here is my 93 Works that has been converted to a forward motor sort of layout. I made some videos about this a couple months ago, I think earlier in the year. So I just want to try it out. I want to get footage. If it happens to drive better than the 94 YZ10, then of course I'll race with it. I don't think that's too likely, although it is quite nice. Really, my front-up plan is to run the 94 YZ10 for Classic four-wheel drive buggy. I have other variants of this. I have another 94 YZ10 that I've run at Vonats before. I have a 95 YZ10. I love these chassis. They're really great. They're not quite as tunable as other things like a double X4 or a laser, but they're really, really good. So the front-up plan is this guy, and then I'll see how much footage I can get with this. Just sort of like a proof of concept that the platform actually works when you do a forward motor conversion. I think the other reason is I only have a few sets of M4 electrons for this chassis here, but for the YZ10 I've mounted other types of tires. I have ellipses, I have positrons, I got a couple of different tread types that I can play with for these rims here, because I'm using Yokomo wheels on this, and on this one I have Kyosho Optima wheels. I did some sort of weird ass conversion on that. But anyway, that's classic 4-wheel. And then for 4-wheel drive buggy, that's the 10.5 turn class. The front up is once again the Laser ZXS Evo, and then the backup is going to be my Cat 3000. ZXS Evo is the front up this year, partly because I still have unfinished business with it. I keep saying that every year, but each time I keep refining it further and further. I've made some further improvements to the drivetrain. I believe I've fixed pretty much all the problems I had with it. Fingers crossed. Famous last words. So, not that it had many problems to begin with, but, the issue with the rear belt kind of eating itself alive that I had last year should be resolved. I think that was something that came loose in the gearbox, perhaps. I also made some steering geometry updates. I'm talking a little too fast here. This should help it with tight corners. Of course, we'll see what the actual layout is at the track. But I'm very hopeful for this year. And then if for whatever reason it doesn't work out, I have the Cat 3000. I've run this at RCHR on their turf track when they used to have one. A couple of times I've made footage of this. And I really like the way it drives. Even though it looks kind of weird, it actually drives really nicely. And it's very direct. It's one of those kinds of 4-wheel drive buggies that goes exactly where you point it. It does what you want it to do. It's not, if you set it up right, and it's not that hard to set it up right, it doesn't do anything unpredictable. Very, very comfortable driving this car. That is kind of, in some ways, the exact opposite of the Cat 2000 EC with the laydown shocks that I ran recently at Insanity, where it felt good initially, and then it was kind of all over the place. So that just kind of teaches me that 4-wheel drive buggies with more stand-up shocks are much more suitable for the kind of driving that I like to do. So, I could have brought, for example, the Cat 3000 and the Cat 2000 that I ran last year in the classic 4-wheel drive class. That would be a nice pairing. And maybe one day in the future I'll do that sometime. But I want to, again, at the very least, get some footage of this running on that dirt track. See how it compares to the ZXS. It should be pretty comparable. But yeah, front up options, ZXS Evo, 94YZ10. Those are sort of my favorites at the moment. Stadium truck. Last year I ran the RC10 T2, and if I was able to get footage of that race, I would have kept that truck home this year, because I TQ'd and I won the race. And the TQ run was actually, it was in the second qualifying round. I almost had, I think it was an 18-lap run. It would have been the only 18-lap run out of all the classes that were run, I think. So this truck was really, really, really good. So, on the one hand, I want to bring that back and do well again with it, because it's certainly capable. I still have all the tires and everything that I used last year for it, and I mounted a few other sets of new tires. On the other hand, I have my Kyosho Pro XRT, which I love driving. Every time I put that truck down, no matter what track I'm on, I always feel comfortable with that truck. It always sort of drives the way I like. So hopefully there will be time for me to sort of play around with these two. Right now I'm planning to race the Pro XRT. If I have time, I'll try to get some footage of the T2 just to make sure I have footage of it. But of course, subject to change depending on which one actually feels better on the day. And then for a 2-wheel drive buggy, I'm yet again falling into a trap I keep trying not to fall into. Last year, I ran my TRX3 and it felt great. I think I qualified third. I ended up finishing 5th or 6th or something, but it's easily a top 3 car in a competitive field. So that's sort of my baseline. I made a few changes to the rear shocks. I think I changed the pistons, the oil a little bit. I changed the rear camber gain a little bit. So hopefully what I set it to now should just give me that little bit extra performance that I would have liked last year, even though it was still very good. So that's my baseline. And then there's these 3 here that is sort of, I have reason to bring. So the Pro X is what I would really like to drive in the qualifiers and the mains. So my primary priority for Tua will be comparing these two. And, because I've run the Pro X a couple times over the last year at other races, namely the RC10 Talk races, and I keep refining it a bit more and a bit more. And I'm really liking it. I really like how it drives. So I'm hopeful that it will be at least as good as the TRX3. If I can drive it as consistently fast as the TRX3, then I'll run it. Last year when I brought it to Adrenaline and I was playing with it during open practice, it was quick, but it wasn't consistent. And I was having some mechanical problems with, I think, wheel axles breaking and other stuff, so I put it aside. But I updated the CVAs, or the universals to CVAs on it, so I shouldn't have at least that mechanical problem. I think I've also found a pretty good suspension setup for it, so that's my number one option if it can be as good or consistent as that. And then the sidebar, if you will, is the B2 and the Kyosho Triumph. The Triumph, it's another one of those cars, kind of like the Pro XRT, where you put it down and it drives really nicely. So it would be hard to not bring it, especially to compare it to these two at that track, because one thing I really liked about last year's layout is that the jumps weren't that big, which would be really suitable for the Triumph, because when I've brought this to Insanity RC for the RC10 Talk races, it drove nicely there during practice, but the jumps that they tend to use on that track, at least some of the jumps, tend to be bigger, and the tracks are certainly rougher. So the car isn't quite set up for that. It doesn't have quite the suspension travel that you would need for that kind of a track. But on a sort of more, let's say, vintage typical track with smaller jumps, I think this would do really well. So again, one of those things where if I have time, I'll throw it down. We'll see how it does against these two. And then with the B2, I'm just curious. I'm not likely to actually race this, but I want to get footage. I have the Hydrodrive in this still, so I'm kind of curious to see, with the Hydrodrive in it, if the surface conditions are the same, will I have an advantage? And also it would be useful to use this to help me test different tire combinations for the RB Type R, because again, these use the same wheels and tires, the exact same sets of wheels. So I have different tires with different inserts and compounds, or actually not compounds, but different brands rather, and tread patterns that I want to try out. So really, like, if I have, say, one experimental split on this car with certain types of front and rear tires, and another split on that car with certain kinds of front and rear tires, even though they're different chassis with slightly different setups, geometrically the RB Type R is very similar to a B3, which is basically a B2. And so I can play different games with, like, traction compound and tires and everything, just to figure out in terms of tires what will work best for this car on Sunday, or the Sunday of the event, which is for Y2K20 Buggy. So that's the main reason why I'm bringing the B2. It's more like an experimental car. And then I could argue the same thing for the Triumph as well, because the rear tires for the Triumph, the Pro X, and the TRX3, I have them set up to all use the same types of rims. So I can run very similar experiments with different rear tires, and I have a bunch of different rear tires I want to play around with to sort of quickly see, car to car to car, which tire setup works the best. And it's a lot faster to bring a couple of cars with different types of tires mounted on them and just go from car to car to car than to take one car off the track, take the wheels off, put new wheels on, get back out there, when you can basically just have a lineup of cars ready. So I'm hoping that this will actually speed up the down selection of what kinds of tires I want to use, assuming that I have, that the setups themselves are working well enough for the track conditions, like in terms of the suspension setups. So that's kind of my hope, and hopefully also I'll be able to get enough footage during open practice so that I'm not leaving anything on the table. The key thing for me is trying to get good footage of these cool cars running on the track, especially the ones that I don't end up racing in the qualifiers and the mains. So we'll see how that goes. This is kind of an ambitious list here, but I think I can manage it, especially because I've already had one race on that track from last year, so I think I have a pretty good idea of, what I need for the setup, so I don't have to chase setups. I'm just going to be kind of chasing tires and figuring out which specific chassis I want to use. That's at least that's the goal. So yeah, looking forward to it. And if you're going, I look forward to seeing you there and kicking your butt, hopefully. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks for watching.